Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. I think you're going to love this episode with Amber Landsford. She is, you know what she says at the beginning of this episode is, my story is hard. At the tail end, it's amazing. And I think that really is a great summary of this episode, that Amber has been through so much in her life. I've known her for about 1.5 years now, and I really had no idea about what she had experienced until we started talking about her being on the podcast. I know her in the present and what goes on with her in the present moment. And I just see her as being such a competent and capable woman who is always full of resources. She took the online HSP course. She's the admin for the Unapologetically Sensitive group. So she's someone that I count on and that I have regular contact with, not super close, but she just is always reaching out and providing amazing resources. And so when I learned about her story, I really wanted her to be able to share it with you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what to expect in this story. She was very, very respectful. I don't think that there's anything in here that warrants a trigger warning. But both of her parents are highly sensitive. They both have addictions. There were addictions in her family. She was diagnosed with diabetes when she was 7 years old, and her parents really were not very equipped to help her manage it and were just not very present for her. And so we talk about resilience, and what she says in the episode is that no one taught her to breathe, to feel, to heal, how to survive until she met her husband. She saw 35 specialists in order to try and get some help with some of the things that were going on. And she's found some amazing, what I'm going to call alternative methods for healing. I realized during the episode, I did not really share my personal beliefs. If you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know what they are. But I think I was feeling like a little like a sheep, in that I worry about offending people and what I'm going to say. And then I'm going to come on at the end and I'm going to share a little bit more about really what my thoughts are. That everybody gets to decide for themselves what their path is, and whether that's taking medicine, whether there are certain things that we need to do. That nobody is saying that there's one right path to follow. Amber's done amazing healing in her life. She's really dug deep. I consider her to be, even though she's not a medical person, she's not a trained therapist. Actually, I'm wondering if she does have a background. She might. I haven't gotten her bio, which is my fault. I told her that I would send her what I needed from her. And to be honest with you, the last couple of weeks have just been really challenging for a number of reasons. By the time you hear this episode, you've probably heard all the bonus episodes and you know what's going on. But she was incredibly gracious with me, and I normally would have her bio to read it to you. Amber sent me her bio. It's the 11th hour because this is how I'm rolling these days. So I really wanted to honor Amber and have you hear her bio. Amber Landsford is a highly sensitive person from Columbus, Ohio. As a lifelong diabetic and a complex trauma survivor, her body broke. She could barely walk, digest food, or sleep. As an avid researcher, she's found a way to reverse her diabetes complications using The Diabetes Solution by Richard K. Bernstein. She found a way to come off all pharmaceuticals using Dr. Kelly Brogan's book, A Mind of Your Own. She also found the Original Strength Reload book by Tim Anderson and became trained as an original strength coach to help herself out and help others rebuild their nervous system. She is passionate about helping others learn to manage their diabetes, practice mindfulness, and rebuild their nervous systems through the Original Strength yoga and breathing. Everybody gets to choose what works for them, and I'm not dictating whether people should be on medication or not on medication, whether, you should be doing anything. What I can say is Amber has been through the ringer. She's done her work. She found out what works for her. And a lot of the practitioners that she suggests are also practitioners that I follow. Y'all get to decide what you want to do for yourself. But I think this is an incredibly powerful episode. So some other things that she talks about is what she does on a daily basis to maintain herself. She talks about Wim Hof. I think it's Wim Hof. And also the havening technique. She talks about how she uses mindfulness and self-compassion. She talks about the concept of Santosha. I'm going to let you listen to the episode if you're not familiar with that. We talk a little bit about trauma-sensitive yoga, and she asks herself consistently, she'll ask her body, what do you feel like doing? And I just think this is incredibly powerful. So if you want to know more about Amber, either join the closed Facebook group, Unapologetically Sensitive, or look at the show notes. And if you listen to the episode, we tell you how to get them. And if you're listening on an iPhone, on Apple iTunes, the show notes are usually in the description. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say. My brain is just not functioning very well right now. I'm fine. There's just been a lot going on and the strain is showing. I think that's it. I will come on at the end and tell you a little bit more about my thoughts about what she said. And now, on to the show. Hey, Amber, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I am happy to have you here. I'm hearing a little feedback, and so I'm going to trust that it's going to be okay. I think we're good. So, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do. I am at the highest level when you take Elaine Aron's test.
All right. And before we started recording, we were talking, you were saying you were a little nervous. Are you comfortable talking a little bit about what's feeling nervous and what's going on for you? Because I think this is something that as HSPs, we get nervous and we don't really talk about too much.
Yeah, I am nervous. I'm both nervous and excited. I've never done a podcast before, and I have a hard story, but it's an amazing story. And so to actually publicly share it for the first time is definitely nerve-wracking. I definitely walked around the block to kind of burn through some of that energy before I sat down to talk with you.
Yeah. And I think anytime that we share our story, we allow people to see us, we do new things. I think we do get nervous, and you may have what I call a vulnerability hangover afterwards. Oh, I said too much. I shouldn't have talked about that. Did I do this right? And with the depth of processing. And so when that happens, I just really try and reassure myself and like, it's okay. It's all good.
Yeah. When I have the vulnerability hangover, I always look into what part of myself needs the most love right now. Because Brene Brown had a vulnerability hangover, and look how famous she is and how much she's changed the world. So I think sharing our story is valuable and important.
Absolutely. Which is why I have you here today. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about your story. We've talked about this a little bit, that it's not so much your story that's important, but I think for people to recognize where you came from so that they can really have such a deep appreciation for all that you've done and what a miracle and how different your life is now, that I think it's really going to give people an incredible amount of hope. That's what my hope is. I don't know.
Well, I sure hope so. My story is hard. It's incredibly hard, but the tail end of it is becoming amazing. And I'm so excited to live the rest of my life. Unfortunately, both of my parents are highly sensitive, and their marriage was kind of a mess, and both of them chose addictions. And then I was brought into the world, and their marriage was still a mess. And when I was 7 years old, I was diagnosed with diabetes. And that's an overwhelming disease for anybody because it's 24 hours a day. It's constant shots, constant blood sugar testing. And when I was diagnosed, for about the first 5 years, there wasn't even a blood sugar meter. And so I'm highly sensitive as can be. And then both my parents are highly sensitive, and they have this sick kid that nobody can even tell them what to do. And at that point, I was first diagnosed, and they were saying oh, we hope you make it to the 10-year mark. And as a highly sensitive kid, as an INFJ who lives in the future, it paralyzed me. And unfortunately, all the addictions in my family got worse and worse and worse. And the addictions were always changing, whether it was drinking or drugs or alcohol or women or work. everything was always shifting around me. And so no one ever taught me how to breathe and how to feel and how to process hard things. So I just learned to survive, really. And I really learned how to just survive until I met my husband. And that was kind of the first branch into having a supportive relationship and learning how to feel.
I love that. Can you just kind of paint a little bit of a picture of what it looked like when your diabetes was unmanaged when you were a kid, just so people understand what that looked like?
Sure. Way back when I was diagnosed, there was only one type of insulin, and that was pork insulin. And doctors just guessed all over the place because nothing ever worked. And I would test my blood sugars and it didn't work. And, you go to all these appointments and no one can figure it out. Both of my parents would lose their minds in the middle of the appointment and fight the entire rest of the day. So I just kind of spiraled. But the amazing thing about it is a couple years ago, probably about 6 years ago now, I found an incredibly smart endocrinologist who had reversed all of his diabetes complications. And his name is Richard Bernstein. He's the author of The Diabetes Solution. And so when I was a kid, your blood sugars are all over the map, and the American Diabetes Association tells you to count your carbohydrates, but don't count vegetables and protein. So nothing ever made sense. And as an INFJ, I knew that if this doesn't make sense, I'm not going to live. And that's a heavy, heavy weight for a highly sensitive person, for really anybody, but for a highly sensitive person to carry around. So that's pretty much the gist of it. There is an incredible way to manage diabetes now. So, when I was a kid and diagnosed and they said, oh, maybe you'll make it to 10 years, maybe you'll make it to 25. Well, now I'm 44 and have had it for 38 years. And I have no doubt that when I die, something else is going to take me because I have reversed most of my complications. And now I can manage my sugars since I found Dr. Bernstein really close to an A1C of 5. So that's what it looked like as a kid, but it's way different now.
Yeah. And for people that don't know what an A1C is, and that you're a 5, can you just give us a little snapshot so that we appreciate that?
Sure. An A1C is your average blood sugar and what your, blood sugars have been for the past 3 months. And so when I was a kid, the goal was to be under a 10, and that's like a blood sugar of probably 300. And so things have come way farther with the American Diabetes Association, but they're still really far off.
Yeah. And today, an average blood sugar that you would want, if you're looking at, like you said, 300. So an average fasting blood sugar, you would want it to be where for your average person?
So a perfect blood sugar is 83. Bernstein says through all of his analysis, 83. I really shoot between 80 and 90. Mm-hmm. And I eat super high protein. I eat very little carbs. And the only carbs that I eat are vegetables.
Mm-hmm. And are you on insulin?
I do. I take insulin in the morning and insulin at night to last me the entire day. And then I take little tiny amounts during the day for the protein and vegetables that I eat. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And all of that is a constant juggling act because really everything affects your blood sugars. When you exercise, the heat, the emotions, the state of your nervous system. So anytime I'm going to do something that causes me to sweat, my blood sugar will raise. I mean, it is a constant juggling act. And if I exercise, it can affect me for 12 hours after. So it's a very draining disease for even if you're not diabetic. I mean, even if you're not highly sensitive.
Sure. So let's paint a little bit more of a picture of just some of the things that happened to you before you met your husband that created just kind of the dark part of your life, so that then we can move into what you've done. Because what I love is that you have so many amazing tools and so many things that you practice that I want to share that. But I think people need to understand really even more of where you came from without going into, necessarily gory details, but just laying out a map so people kind of get a sense.
Sure. So since I saw all of my parents, but both of my parents and my stepmom have addictions, I chose my own funky addictions. And I mean, the first time I had problems with food, I was 11 years old. I just stopped eating. I was so overwhelmed with diabetes and what I had to eat. I went almost an entire year with barely eating. And somehow I kind of recovered from that. I don't really think recovered is a good word, but I probably found some other fascination to leave the present moment. And those fascinations as a kid were like chewing way too much gum, drinking way too much water. You know, as a kid, really your only option is hurting yourself because there aren't drugs and alcohol available. But there were definitely times, since there was always alcohol at my parents' house, the first time I ever got drunk, I was 11 because I was always home alone. And so I was like, I don't want diabetes. I'll just drink, or I'll just take the car out for a drive when I was like 13 because your prefrontal cortex has gone offline. So those little tiny things, because you're just looking for any way to leave the present moment because it was so, so hard.
Yeah. I often also look at those as ways that we try and master control, that we feel so powerless that we just want to be able to manage and control something. So whether that's food
Right.
or counting or cleaning or exercise or any of those things, you know, it takes us out of the
Right.
pain that we're in, and it gives us a sense that we have control over something, even if it hurts us.
Right. And there was one time when I joined a gym that was open 24 hours a day. I was at that gym 12 hours a day because it was something I could control. I couldn't control my blood sugars with what the Diabetes Association was doing. I couldn't control my family. I couldn't control the overwhelming emotions that I had. And really, resilience is built by your parents helping you in your first 18 years or whatnot to bounce back from trauma, to bounce back from hard times. My parents were never home. And if they were home, they were addicted to something. So I didn't get any resilience training. But you know, and as much as though all of the strange little addictions that I had, I'm so, so grateful for them because they absolutely kept me alive to this point. Your body will do whatever it takes to keep you alive. And I honor that. And I even tell that little girl inside of me, I'm so glad that you did that because it kept you here. So the rest of my life is going to be a lifelong love journey of falling back in love with my body and taking care of it.
Yeah. Were there any adults in your life, teachers, maybe a parent of a friend, an aunt or an uncle, or anybody that you can remember? And they didn't even have to be in your life for a long time, but were there anybody that you can think of that was kind of a touchstone for you?
One of my basketball coaches, Coach Hicks, was great. My friend Sarah's parents, although I'm sure I absolutely drove them bananas with how many Diet Cokes that I drank, their home was always available. My friend Kathleen, her home was always available. And those were really the safe places that I went. My girlfriend Kate's home was always available. And so there was a really big episode that happened in our family when I was 13. And I literally bounced from those three friends' homes just to survive.
Yeah.
So those were kind of the people that came beside me.
Yeah. And what we know about resilience is all it takes is one person, whether it's a teacher or a friend or somebody's parent or, you know, somebody that takes notice in a child. And so if we think about ourselves and if we have kids and our kids have friends, that we may be that one person, or if you're a teacher, that kid that, you know, you just see and you know that they're struggling, that's what we know about resilience. And because I've known you for probably close to a year and a half now, I'm thinking, yeah, you know, and I just recently found out more about your history. Like I knew you had things going on, but I didn't know much about it. And so what my experience of you is like, you have such a well-developed sense of yourself and what you need. So it's like, in spite of not getting it from your parents, it feels like from my perspective that there were other supports there that really helped you to be able to be the woman that you are today.
Yeah, and the biggest person and healer in my life has been my husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a stark difference the day I met my husband, and he is my absolute favorite human being, and he is peaceful and patient, and I'm an Enneagram 4, he's an Enneagram 9, which is a great match because he never leaves. And, you know, he helps me work through things. So he has been the biggest contributor to my resilience. And then I have had an incredible Bible study leader through the years. So God has placed, I've got a pack of like 10 good friends that have really stuck with me through this. And I think my resilience has really built over the past 10 years. I didn't have much before that, and then there's been a couple solid women who have come in and been pseudo moms for me, because unfortunately I don't have a relationship with my mom. So they've kind of come in and nurtured and loved me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that were challenging so that people really understand about some of the things, or do you feel like you've covered that enough, and do you want to move forward into what things have been helpful for you? I'm feeling like there's more, but I don't want to make you dig, but I don't think that people can appreciate.
Yeah. Well, so I'll tell the story of my body breaking. That gives you a good picture of kind of my childhood. And I mean, I could really, if you just imagined the most complex trauma story you can imagine, that was my childhood. Without vomiting all my trauma right now, if you can just, that's the picture. No matter what you think might have happened, it happened. But about 6 years ago, I started getting super, super nauseous. And really, probably 5 dramatic things had happened, like horrific things. And it was too much for my nervous system to handle. And I started getting super nauseous, and they kept saying, oh, it's your diabetes. Oh, it's your diabetes. Oh, you have gastroparesis. I went to over 35 appointments because I couldn't figure out what was going on in my stomach. I went to the top functional medicine doctor, the top naturopath. I even went to the top endocrinologist and paid over $15,000. And he said it was my diabetes. But the amazing thing that happened, so in the midst of all that, all these things kept showing up, and they're like, oh, that's your diabetes, that's your diabetes, that's your diabetes. So I went to the top endocrinologist, and I amazingly learned how to almost perfectly manage my sugars, but that still didn't take care of it. My body kept breaking, and I got horrific feet pain. I got to the point I could barely walk. My feet hurt so bad. Shoulder pain, hands pain. I could barely use my hands. And I kept jumping from doctor to doctor to doctor, thinking that they had the answers. And then I found this amazing book called Original Strength. And it's really a process of rebuilding my nervous system. So all of those things that they said were diabetes weren't. They were a combo of being highly sensitive, which affects your nervous system, having a dramatic freeze response, having a throat that gets a lump in it when I get nervous. All of that shuts down your body. Then I've got severe trauma. That affects your nervous system. And I've got diabetes. That affects your nervous system. So all 3 of those blew up at the exact same time. You know, and I've got these 2 amazing little kids that I had to figure out how to be a mom to. And I absolutely knew that if Jesus decided to take me home, they were going to see me give it everything I had to be here. So, yeah, so that's kind of the heart of my story. But, I really, really, really started focusing on my breath. And I pay attention to my nervous system 95% of the day now. And the amazing thing is, I don't have any mood swings anymore. I don't have any panic. I don't have any ADHD symptoms. I'm not bipolar. I don't have all of these strange things that doctors will label you with because you're highly sensitive, trying to fit up in a jacked up world. So any of those symptoms, if anyone has them, I just think, what needs to change? Not what medication do they need to go on? What in their life needs to change? Because I think as highly sensitive people, like Kelly Brogan says, we're canaries in a coal mine. We know the world is jacked up, and we're these sweet little artistic, sensitive creatures who weren't meant to live in a coal mine. But I think, big pharma and doctors are going to start telling you everything's wrong with you and things are wrong with your brain when really things just need to change.
Yeah. For those people that don't know who Kelly Brogan is, why don't you let people know?
Kelly Brogan is one of my favorite human beings, and we've never met, but someday I want to write a book with her. she is the author of A Mind of Your Own. And then she has another book out, and I'm reading it right now, but I can't remember the name right now. It's called Own Yourself. And so Kelly Brogan is an MIT-trained medical doctor she went to Cornell, became an MIT-trained psychiatrist, and after just a couple years of prescribing medications to people, she started seeing all of these horrific things going on and realizing what those medications were doing to people's brains. And so she will not write a script anymore, and she leads programs to get people off of psychiatric medications and really to do everything to take care of your brain and body holistically rather than relying on medication. And, for so long I had so much anxiety that I really would take every 4 hours a Klonopin or a Xanax just to get me through the day. And I haven't taken a medication that I don't know how many years it's been, but right when Kelly Brogan wrote A Mind of Your Own, I went on a 2-year process to get me off of all medication and really purify my body. And now I don't have anxiety, mood swings. I go to bed at 8 and I wake up at 5 in the morning. All of that with no pharmaceuticals.
That's great. I love that. So let's start talking a little bit about what your healing process looked like. And Amber has sent me an extensive list of all these resources. So if you go to the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com and click on this episode, all of the resources and tons more are going to be in there that Amber sent me, because you're just a treasure trove of amazing resources.
Yeah, well, no doctor was going to help me stay alive, so I had to figure it out on my own. But so I do, and I'll post this in the Highly Sensitive Facebook as a Word document, so that way people can look at it and see what they want to try and what they don't want to try and what works for them and what doesn't. I start every day with meditation. I have an incredibly active brain, so the second I wake up, my brain's racing into the 9,000 things I want to do that day. So I just I look up the 10-minute calm meditation or mindfulness meditation, and I look that up on Mindful Movement, and that'll be listed in the show notes. And I at least do a 10-minute meditation because I have to get in touch with my body, my breath, and slow the tone for the day. So that's kind of how I start out the day. And then I go downstairs, have my coffee, and I sit outside with God and tell him everything I'm thankful for. Because I really think that gratitude, and I let it sink in. Like I go sit out there and I'm like, thank you, God, for this. And I feel it somatically in my body so that my body knows you're safe, you're okay. 10,000 things were great yesterday. Today's going to be okay too. So I really start my day with that. And I always start my day with my feet in the grass. I think it's, we live in a world that's got, electromagnetic fields all over it. And I think there's so much goodness that comes out of grounding. So I sit with my feet in the grass and have my coffee and just know that I'm taking care of myself. So those are the first 2 things I do in the day. Then I play with my puppy. And then I do original strength. And this has been the most amazing thing to really add to my life. So it's a process of rebuilding your nervous system. And Tim Anderson wrote the book. He's an incredible human being. If you just even go to the www.originalstrength.net, Tim posts videos every week on rebuilding your nervous system. And so I think as highly sensitive people, we already have a fragile nervous system and with an exaggerated freeze response. And so the more I can train my nervous system to do hard things, the more successful I'm going to be. So, when I fell apart 6 years ago, if I would have been training my nervous system, I would have had the resilience to make it through. So now I know I'm 45. Someday crap's going to hit the fan somewhere again. I have to be strong enough to deal with it. So I start my day with original strength, and that's everything you did as a baby to gain the ability to walk. It's diaphragmatic breathing with your tongue on the roof of your mouth. And this is everything a baby did. For the first 6 months, that's the only thing they did. And then you start moving your eyes, and then you start moving your head. And as a baby, your head weighed 30% of your body. So that's what started the stabilization of your spine as a baby. And that really your ability to control your head is your most important thing. And then it's rolling, rocking, and crawling. And all of those things build up all the muscles in your core to give you the ability to walk and talk and communicate with people. And your cranial nerves give you your social engagement nerve or your social engagement abilities. So original strength is probably the biggest thing that I do. And it takes 15 minutes a day. So it's not like, oh my God, I have to drive to the gym for an hour and sweat. No, it's 15 minutes. So that has probably given me the biggest change in my world. And ever since I started doing original strength, day by day, my body gets better and better and better. And since I'm crossing my midline, which is balancing the sides of my brain, then my anxiety is less, my response is easier. And I don't have any like crazy ADD symptoms anymore because I'm crossing my midline. My brain is balanced. And a lot of this is used also with people with autism and with kids in school. Because oftentimes if you're going, into la la land in your brain, the hemispheres of your brain aren't firing correctly.
And can you explain what crossing the midline means for people that are not familiar with that term?
Yeah. So like when you're walking and swinging your arms, you're crossing if I were to split my body in half, it's going across the middle. So if I take my arm and roll across, I'm crossing the midline of my body. Because, just like in crawling, you're using your knees and your hands. That's crossing your midline because you're using both in opposing directions. The same with rolling. Rolling is incredible for back pain because you're crossing your midline and stabilizing all of those muscles.
Is part of that too opposite arm and opposite leg, that it gets your brain working on both sides? Because that's part of what happens when you walk. So, Go ahead.
And that's why. So before this, I was incredibly nervous, which I think is natural for doing your first podcast. So instead of what 10 years ago I had taken a Xanax, I just went and walked around the block and swung my arms huge, and now I'm perfectly fine. If there's a time at night where I wake up and I'm having trouble sleeping or my brain's kind of racing, I'll go crawl in our hallway to rebalance my brain. And in trauma, it really affects your brain. And so you have to get to the point where you're breathing into your brain and you're balancing what's going on up there.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine myself being too lazy to get out of bed and we have hardwood floors. I imagine myself like a bug on my back crawling in the air, which you probably don't get I think it's proprioception, which you need of the weight of, your hands and your knees on the floor in order for it to count. But
no, it actually doesn't.
No?
The proprioception is great. And there's incredible proprioception when you're doing the rolling on the ground, mm-hmm. because all of the information from the carpet is coming through and nourishing your brain. There are times that I'll sit and just haven and rub my arms, and that does it too. But you can actually anyone can do a contralateral pattern. Even if somebody's in a wheelchair, if you just reach over and touch your opposite knee, you don't even have to get out of bed.
With your opposite hand. So it's opposite hand to opposite knee.
Correct. In my first original strength conference, there was a gentleman there that had a stroke. And he was just learning again to cross his midline to help his brain.
Yeah, I'm imagining my husband waking up in the middle of the night and I'm on my back like a cockroach. What are you doing, honey?
Right.
just relaxing myself. Go back to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there's a funny side note there. My husband and I don't sleep in the same room, mm-hmm. because we are all four of us in our house are highly sensitive. Mm-hmm. We all need incredible amounts of time alone. So the first, I think, 10 years or something, we slept in the same room. We slept terrible. Because if he's making noise, then I'm annoyed. If I'm making noise, then he's annoyed. So we have our own rooms. It's perfect.
I love that. I often wake up in the middle of the night and I know it's a terrible habit, but it's just where I'm at, that I often will get on my phone and I keep my headphones plugged in so my phone doesn't inadvertently make noise. But, I'm often under the covers because he's very sensitive to light. And often in the morning when he wakes up, he's like, you don't have to be under the covers anymore.
Yeah.
What are some other tools that you can, well, go ahead.
No, I just was going to say it makes sense. One of my favorite tools, I've been doing this probably for maybe the past year. I don't know if you've ever heard of Wim Hof, but his wife had a panic disorder and actually, committed suicide when her kids were incredibly little. So Wim Hof is this crazy, I think he's Dutch or something, but he started training himself in the cold. So he said, as a dad of 2 little kids, I had to train myself to do hard things. And so that's what I do. I do his breathing in the morning, which is great for cardiovascular, great for getting air to your brain and strengthening your nervous system. And then I take probably the first half of my shower is hot. And then I do as cold as I can get the water after that. Because I think I was meant to write a book or do something crazy. But even in everyday life, I have to train myself to do hard things. There's going to be a day when someone in my family is diagnosed with something. I can't lose my ever-loving mind again. I have to build myself strong. So I will take an absolutely freezing shower and I will just, girl, we can do hard things. And I actually took one before this. So I went to yoga this morning, sweat like crazy, came home and the last 5 minutes of my shower were cold. And I was like, girl, you can do this podcast and you can do it well.
I love that. I do wrap up my showers with cold water, not as long as you do. And I live in California, so sometimes cold is really not that cold. But yeah, I think that the things that we can do, and again, everybody gets to choose. This is just giving people a menu, and it's not dictating that this is what you have to do or there's a right way or a wrong way. That this is just giving you more things to add to your toolbox. And if you're interested in anything and you want to try it out, great. And if not, and you have different beliefs or different things that work for you, this is just giving you more options.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important. So I gave you like 20, 25 things to really help your nervous system. But you can look at that list and go, you have to ask your body, what do you feel like doing? Because part of building your nervous system is getting my body to trust that I'm going to get air to my brain. Because my entire nervous system's job is to keep me alive. And part of that is for it to breathe on its own to get air to my brain. Well, that wasn't happening. And my body started shutting down. And, if I think back 15 years ago, there were signs all along. I started getting horrible headaches. They diagnosed me with fibromyalgia. They diagnosed me with this, that, and the other. There were definitely different signs that showed up, but nobody ever said, your brain's not getting enough air. Your nervous system isn't strong enough to pump air up there.
I want you to talk about some of the other diagnoses that you were given so that if anybody's hearing this, that it may make more of a connection, because I think people need those specifics to go like, oh,
sure.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing that's incredible. So depression, I think, is just highly sensitive person trying to fit into a jacked up world. Canary in the coal mine. I think anxiety is unrepressed emotions and just being super nervous, because if I have to take a Xanax to go somewhere, I probably shouldn't go there. So as a highly sensitive person, I think we try to fit into the world when we shouldn't really try that. We should, learn how to take care of our bodies and our nervous systems, because now that I do life differently, I don't have any of those symptoms. But I think depression, I think anxiety, I think if you're having sleep problems, you're probably not, there's probably some trauma there and maybe not having enough downtime during the day. So I know when I have sleep issues, my brain's waking up in the middle of the night processing what I didn't give my body time to process during the day. But the amazing thing is, now that I breathe all day and take care of my brain and I actually love my brain and talk to my brain and get air up there, I can sleep for a solid 10 hours with no medication or anything.
I love that.
But for me, it showed up with,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. So dry mouth dry mouth is a signal. And I would ask doctors about this all the time, and they're like, oh, it's your diabetes. It wasn't at all. It's because my vagus nerve. So all of the information that goes to the vagus nerve, 80% of it is coming from your breath and how your body and heart feel. So it's afferent information. Well, I was never breathing as a kid or as an adult. And so my vagus nerve started to pull my head forward, which creates the dryness in your mouth. So those times when you get anxious and have dry mouth, that means C1 in your neck is going out. So I do some self-cranial sacral, which you can read about in The Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve by Stanley Rosenberg. I do that every morning. So dry mouth for me was a big deal. Headaches, fibromyalgia. So eczema or any rashes that show up are generally something to do with your spine. So when your spine gets out of whack, it's going to start communicating and showing ways of your body to say, hey, pay attention, something's not right. Carpal tunnel syndrome, any type of tingling in your hands, tingling in your fingers is all part of your spine being out of alignment. But with original strength and some muscle work, all of that can get better. So I don't have any rashes anymore. I don't get the dry mouth anymore. I don't have the headaches. I don't have any fibromyalgia. But those are some of the specifics that I ended up with.
Okay. And what I was going to say about anxiety is, I know that it's interesting. In my Facebook feed this morning, something came up from 2 years ago when I went to the highly sensitive therapist retreat, and I did a little Facebook Live on recognizing how anxious I would get and how I was walking through that. And so I think the other part of it is when we recognize what our fearful thoughts are and learning to use mindfulness and learning how to do things differently, that it's not always that we get anxious and we shouldn't be doing things, but maybe we have beliefs about things, or maybe there are tools that we can use of, if I go and I'm not comfortable, can I leave? Do I have an exit strategy? Can I go with a buddy? There's sometimes more that what we need to do if we have anxiety to understand where it came from. And I've said this many times before, but I think that when we don't know that we're an HSP and we go into an environment and we're overstimulated, we don't know what's going on, we feel like we don't fit in, we just want to get the heck out of there, and we don't know what it is, we end up not wanting to go back into situations because of that fear of overstimulation and overwhelm without recognizing what happened and how we can manage better. So I just wanted to add some clarification to what I heard you say about anxiety and not going into situations.
There are absolutely things that I get nervous about, and I still choose to do them.
Mm-hmm.
And very mindfully, and notice what's going on, and like you kind of figure out one great meditator says, don't ever not go again. Just choose what you're going to try differently this time. So,
Right.
And I always name, like if I'm in a situation, I go, I'm anxious. Where's this coming from? Is this the little kid inside of me? I went to a muscle guy last week who's like famous. Of course I was nervous, and I just honor and say, anyone would be nervous. And then I just kind of at the end go, would I do anything differently? But yeah, I think in mindfulness, which, was part of your course that I absolutely loved, the mindfulness and self-compassion to just notice it. And one of my big things in life is santosha, and it's complete acceptance of this present moment. It's a Sanskrit word that every time I'm in yoga, I just sit there and go santosha, because I can't change anything. I have to drop into complete acceptance of this moment, of my body, of my diabetes, of everything that's happened. And really, so yeah, that helps me with my anxiety.
Can you talk a little bit more about santosha? Because I'm thinking about a graphic that I posted recently where it said acceptance looks like this, not this. And I had a big reaction to it. So I posted on all of my social media because to me, that's not what acceptance means. So I don't know if I'm leading you down a path. I may be.
I remember you posting it, but I honestly don't remember what it looked like. But I know, so santosha for me is anytime I don't like something in my life. Like I use a yoga mat that was $1 at a garage sale. It has holes all over it. And I even have a fancy one at home that I've never taken out of the package. But the reason I do that is to remind me, this is a life I have. If I'm angry that I have diabetes, then my body's going to tense up. If I'm angry that COVID's going on, my body's going to tense up. If I'm angry, and I can feel the anger, that's no problem. But if I sit and keep stirring on it, there's just an acceptance of, what am I supposed to learn here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Santosha for me is accepting everything in my life right now as it is, and everything is meant to be my teacher. Because if I fight it, then my body gets tense and it falls apart.
Yeah. And for me, what it's about is, I think the graphic was about rain of, like acceptance doesn't look like it's raining. I don't like the rain. The acceptance is it's raining. And for me, I can be angry that it's raining. I can be disappointed that I wanted it to be sunny and I, don't like having to deal with getting wet. It's frustrating. It's an inconvenience. And that doesn't mean that I don't accept it. It just means that I'm having a response to it and my feelings are really okay. And like you said, I don't have to sit in it all day, but I'm not going to do what for me is a spiritual bypass of like, okay, I'm just going to accept it. If I'm having feelings about it, for me, I need to express those feelings and allow them to be there. And that will allow me to go like, okay, this is where it's at. And this is what I need to do today.
Well, and the other night, I didn't feel Santosha at all, but I just was trying. And I think you get to a point of Santosha, but after you work through all of the gunk. Like last week, they had told us that my daughter's volleyball was on. We were so excited. She's going to community college. She was going to play. We were so excited. And then 3 days later, they canceled her entire season. Her entire schooling is online next year for her first year of college. I have never been so mad. And I just let myself be mad. But one thing I do, and I'm still mad about it, but I mean, I can't fight it. Just but I think that's true with anything like holding both. I'm mad, but I'm also accepting. So I even wear an infinity necklace to remind myself to hold both. Do I absolutely hate my diabetes? Yes. Do I wish it was easier? Yes. But I've got a loving family. Insulin was created. I have enough money for insulin. So I think, especially as highly sensitive people, we need the ability to hold both. Mm-hmm. So at Hallmark, I got a little infinity symbol that reminds me, no, hold both here, Amber. That sucks, but this is good.
Yep. I love that concept of both and when Justine Folker was on way back within the first, 10 episodes. And if I remember, I will post in the show notes her episode. But that's just been crucial to both and that I can be angry, frustrated. I don't like this. And there's also things that are going on that are okay. And it's, with your daughter, it's like that's so much loss that COVID has really taken away kids, their high school experience, their college experience. And having my son ended up dropping out of school last semester because he's got ADHD, and the online experience and the way that the school transitioned to online learning just did not help him. And he was really struggling, and he had really started to get the swing of school and had gotten off academic probation and figured out what he needed to do. And then with COVID, it was a whole new game. And so it is what it is, but to honor these kids and how much loss they're experiencing for what we took for granted as, a normal high school experience or a normal college experience that, and for kids that are in elementary school and aren't getting to play with their friends and playing on sports and all of those things, it's loss and it's real. And I think that part needs to be seen and heard.
Right. And I think there's been a tremendous amount of grief for everybody. And, and there's been a tremendous amount of grief in our family. It was my daughter's senior year. And graduation part, I mean, there's nothing. Trips are canceled. Yeah. There's been so much loss, but our family's always trying to go, hold both. This has been terrible. Where's the good in it? And we can seriously tell you probably 15 or 20 amazingly good things that have happened. And that doesn't discount that this and this and this were horrible.
Right.
So that's the holding both of it. But yeah, it's been hard.
Right. I was just talking with a neighbor today, and every summer she and her husband and her 2 kids, they go back east for a month, and they've done this ever since I've known them. And obviously they're not doing that this year. And we were talking about, I think with the onset of summer, it's bringing another layer of grief with COVID where families and people have summer traditions. And all of that is
Right.
pretty much thrown by the wayside. And even with, yesterday was the 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day coming up, whatever traditions we have in our summer, many of us are having to make shifts. And so it's another layer of grief. And my guess is in this first year of COVID, it's like when there's a death at each anniversary, every event, we're going to have that awareness that we're not doing it the way that we used to do. And it just brings one more layer of grief to the surface. And so to just recognize that that may be going on for some of us.
Yeah. And, I think that I've had so much grief. I've had 3 birthdays and my 20th anniversary during this mess. That was a joke. So, yeah, holding the both of it, but then also at the same time, just going, it's my job so I think, as I talked about earlier, resilience being built in your childhood. So if we can come beside our kids, help them process this, help them figure out the strategies, what are we supposed to learn here? Unfortunately, this is building their resilience a ton.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like anything that's going on, but the more we can love or support our highly sensitive kids through it, the more their resilience muscle will build.
Absolutely. Can you share 1 or 2 breathing exercises that you do so that people that are listening can walk away with something that they can do after listening to this episode?
So there's something called Breathworks online. I really like that. There's also the Wim Hof breathing. But really, as I'm sitting there, my constant thought all day is, where am I? I'm looking at colors. I'm naming colors in my head just to make sure I'm in this moment. Because as an INFJ, I want to be in another moment. But I always go pelvic floor, upper back, brain. And I just notice that in my body constantly. And it can be while I'm driving, it can be when I'm walking, but I just am always aware of where's my pelvic floor, where's my upper back, and am I getting air to my brain? Mm-hmm. And so it's really, really simple. And it doesn't even have to be specific. If you're just paying attention to your breath, you're in the present moment.
Mm-hmm. I launched a new round of the online HSP courses, and Rhonda is a yoga teacher who's in the class. And it's such a simple thing. I do deep breathing during the day, but she said what she learned, and I just love this, is I'm terrible at describing things. So if you take your hand and you put your thumb at the base of your pinky finger, and as you inhale, you bring your thumb to the tip of your pinky as you inhale, hold, and then as you exhale, you drag your thumb down to the bottom. So you're bringing your thumb and then you move to your ring finger. And so as you inhale and move your thumb, you move your thumb to the top of your finger, hold, and then you drag your thumb to the bottom of the base of that finger and you move, so that you do that on all your fingers on one hand and then you switch to the other hand, is a way of kind of marking time. And she would do this when she was a teacher also. I don't have her consent to say this, so I'm like, oh no, am I going to have to cut this out? Like, I never want to say people's names because of my training as a therapist, but then I know people love to hear their names. And so I have this ongoing duel. So I'm just sharing what my process is. I've been doing this, and she said she would use this with kids. When you're taking a test, if you're anxious, you can do this. So it's got that tactile of, your thumb running up and down your hands. It's got the breathing. It's got a visual. And I used this with somebody close to me recently that was really stressed out about something. It's like, it's such a simple tool, but I love it because it's visual, it's tactile, it matches your breathing. I don't know. It's just my new favorite tool.
I love that. There's another great, I'm not exactly sure who the author is. If you just look up the havening technique online, it's a way to reach delta waves in your brain, which is what you do if you get REM at night. Your brain goes into delta waves. So it's just stroking. So if something traumatic happens, if you need to settle your nervous system down, if you just take both hands and stroke on your face, or rub your hands together or down your arms and do that for several minutes, you can actually not develop PTSD at that point.
Wow.
Because your brain is in delta waves processing that.
I love that. And I think we often do that to self-soothe without even recognizing it. I've watched some of the congressional hearings recently, and I've noticed a number of the people that are testifying, you'll see them with their thumb maybe rubbing on their finger or on their wrist. And I just thought how interesting to see that self-soothing and to recognize it. And I don't even know if they know that they're doing it or if it's a conscious thing, but I just think that's interesting. I want to move on and ask you about your experience taking the HSP course because you took it, I think, in the fall. But is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to cover before we move on to that? Because we're running close to time.
Let's see. No, I think that everybody, if they're interested, can really look online for just the different things I do for my nervous system. One of my favorite things to do is yoga. I either do yoga with Adrienne or I go to the yoga studio there. I also do trauma sensitive yoga, but that's at Thriving Tree Yoga here in town. But really, yoga is anything that you're doing that your body and breath are connected. So that has been an incredibly healing thing for me. So I would say that is up there in the top 5 is yoga
great.
every day.
If you're in San Diego, Jean DeCarlo Wagner is doing trauma sensitive yoga also. I'm not sure where, but if you're interested, reach out to me and I can find out. I don't know if she's back in the studio now or how they're offering it, but I just spoke with her recently and I know that she is providing that. Amber, I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about how the experience of taking the online HSP course was for you, because you have so much knowledge about what you need and being an HSP and that you're into the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs. And so you already have so much self-awareness and have done a lot of your own work. How was it for you taking the course now that it's probably been at least 6 months since it finished? I honestly can't remember exactly when it was because that's just not how my brain works.
Yeah, 6 months is probably a pretty accurate guess. What I loved most about the group was actually being with 6 or 7 other highly sensitive people, because I think that on average, there's one of us or maybe 2 of us in a group. And so we always feel that kind of isolated, do I fit in here? So it was really neat to see everyone's processes and how they take care of themselves and just the topics of conversation like mindfulness and self-compassion. You hear that and we all know that, but how does that incorporate into your life? And so hearing all of the different HSPs talk about how that shows up in their life really was validating for me. And I learned different tools to use. I really, really liked the night where we talked about what self-care and boundaries, how that kind of came together just to really learn how do other people do it and how do other people manage. I liked at night too, when we would show up and you would just name however you were doing. And I loved it. I thought that was a great example because I think we all just kind of don't sometimes. We just wait for somebody else. But I like too creating the lifestyle that honors the HSP because, I used to walk around with 9 million symptoms. And what those symptoms were telling me is I needed to live life differently. Not anything was wrong with my brain or my body or my nervous system. I needed to set up a life differently. So I have now created a completely different life where none of those symptoms are now a problem. And so each person in there gave me different ideas of what they do to set that up. So I kind of pick and choose, what works for me to set up that kind of life. But I thought the class was super valuable. I learned a ton, and it was great really to be just in a group of highly sensitive people.
And I remember in one group, I said, what would it be like for you to be in a group of 6 other people? And you specifically said, And I said, but you are right now and feeling safe. Do you remember that?
Right.
Are you okay with me?
Yeah. That's fine. And see, the funny thing is you put me with a group of guys, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. Because I can throw down with the best of them. I have a crass sense of humor, but put me in a group of women that gossip and I become like a clam. The volleyball moms that we were around would gossip about each other and then go out to dinner the same night. And they'd ask me to go. And I was like, I got plans. I don't know what they are, but I'm not going out to dinner with you. So it really did. I didn't want to be a part of a group because group experiences for me, and if women were in it, were not good.
Right. I think we had 2 men in your group. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly?
Yes. Yeah. And I love both of them. They're great.
And so how was it for you being in a group of 4 other women? I think there were 4. How was that for you, or 3?
Yeah. Well, it actually kind of made me less group afraid because I've and like I've been in the same Bible study with 6 women. So for years. And so I think I expand my tolerance now to try new things more because I realize, okay, it wasn't all bad. I can do this. And now I can be in a group and kind of go, I like this person, not really this person, and then expand my, my tolerance and really get to enjoy it.
Yeah. And I find, especially during COVID, there are all kinds of offerings that are coming up. And I find myself being really reluctant as I've led these groups and really created what I hope is a very safe environment for people to show up. However, I'm not so sure that other groups create that. And this is not a better than worse than that I'm trying to create, that I'm, trying to imply, but it's like, I think as HSPs, we've been in environments before where we don't feel seen and heard, we don't feel honored, and we don't really have a lot of motivation to go back into a situation like that because we have to deal with that on a daily basis with everybody in our life. And if we work and we've got kids, and so why would we want to do that? And so it's opening up that possibility of what would it be like to be in a group where you're really being seen and heard and honored.
Right. But I think that was probably the most valuable piece for me is I was part of a group. It went really, really well. And there was even one time when a little bit of conflict came up, just a misunderstanding between 2 people. And my first response was, oh, bleep, how's this going to go? And it turned out fine. And it was easily communicated through. And so I was like, hey, this can be done well. So that was really probably the most, I think the topics were all great and what we need to know, but it was a group dynamics and really seeing that, a group doesn't have to be threatening. That's probably been the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think what it has the potential to do is it recreates, I don't want to say a family of origin group, but in a way, if we grew up in families where we didn't feel seen and heard, and then we continue to have work environments or friend groups where we don't feel like we fit in, it gives people an opportunity to see what it's like to show up in a group, to feel seen and heard. And it's so funny, even this last Wednesday, my Tuesday, my son moved out of the home again, and I was having a lot of grief. And because I was having COVID symptoms and he'd been exposed to COVID, we both got tested. I've recorded an episode about this. It's the last bonus episode. So just go back and look. I don't even know what it's going to be called, but I just recorded it this morning. And I was really debating, do I go help him move or not? Because I wanted to be there and I wanted to be supportive and wanted it's not COVID, but then that's incredibly disrespectful if I go and I do have COVID and I spread to I just was going through these things. And in the morning, right before my group, I told him and he got really upset. So we kind of had this little blowout 10 minutes before I did group. And so I went into group and said like, hey, I just had a fight with my son and I'm not really in a great place. And I always feel like I shouldn't be doing that. But what you said is it models to people, how do we show up when we're struggling and be authentic without having it take over? So it's not that I didn't show up to group. It's not that I talked about it the whole group, but I named it, said what was going on. And what it did was it allowed somebody else that had experienced something that was very difficult and they were having a lot of shame about to talk about, because it allows us to show up and be human. And I don't think that we get a lot of that in the outside world.
Right. So something that you just said that's huge for me is the shame piece. I used to hang my head with the shame of diabetes because I, as a kid, could never figure out how to control it. And I think we do that as HSPs too. If we make a mistake, shame, shame, shame. I mean, we can shame all over ourselves. But what I try to do somatically in my body now is I stand there in front of the mirror and go, you are one of the smartest diabetics in the world, kid. And I just stand there strong because I have always carried fear in my body of diabetes. And now I look and I go, the top muscle guys in the world who have helped you rebuild this. And you are one of the smartest diabetics in the world. And I just sit there and see my strength. And that somatically changes the trauma in my body. Because I had panic for 40 years because I knew diabetes caused complications and I couldn't figure it out.
And what we often do, and I'm one of these people that would try and find people to connect to that would help me with my anxiety or my fear, create that reassurance from the outside. There's nothing wrong with that. We need interdependence. And often the place that we learn to love ourselves, if we didn't get that, is through other people. But what you're so beautifully demonstrating is that now you can show up for yourself and give yourself what it is that you need. Yeah. It doesn't mean you don't need other people. It's not that you can give yourself what you need 100% of the time. But it ultimately comes down to us learning how to really show up and be the parent that we didn't have and to give that to ourselves
Right.
when we need it.
Yeah. I have huge abandonment wounds. Huge. Just ask my husband. Those aren't fun to deal with. But the only person that matters that's not going to leave me is me.
Mm-hmm.
So the only person that I always ask that little girl inside of me, what do you need here? And I remind her, I'm not leaving you ever. A lot of other people have walked out on you. I'm not leaving you, kid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very powerful. Very powerful. Amber, we're over time. This has just been delicious and delightful. How's your nervousness now?
I'm fine. I'm not sure I'll ever even actually listen to this. But I hope that I gave people information. You can totally rebuild your nervous system, and you'll be able to find everything in the show notes. And once you post the podcast, I'll put the Word document online.
Yeah, Amber is the admin in the Facebook group Unapologetically Sensitive. So Amber's the one that does all of our welcome posts. So thank you so much for that. And please do check out the show notes. Amber has sent this exhaustive list of resources. So I think it's worth taking time to check out if anything that she said has resonated. Thank you so much for being here today, Amber. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Hey again. So I'm curious to know what you thought about that. I keep meaning to tell you too, I have this confession to make. I have this 5x8 index card. When I started the podcast, I bought like 300 5x8 index cards thinking I would put all my notes on them so you wouldn't hear papers ruffling when I flip through them. And that went by the wayside. So now I have a ton of 5x8 index cards, but I have the intro written on it, the hey there to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. I can't record the intro without looking at this card. And this morning I recorded a bonus episode and then I couldn't find the card. And I'm like, what do I say? You'd think I'd know by now. It's been a year and a half. This is a place where my attention to details fails me. Anyways, again, this is just my own perspective, but in working with so many HSPs, my own personal experience, I think often what gets labeled as depression and anxiety for HSPs can be our depth of processing and our having deep feelings. And I can tell you that during COVID, I've had more stuff come up for me. And I'm going to do a bonus episode on this. I don't know if you will have heard it by the time this comes out, but with my son moving out of the house, and my son moved out on a Wednesday. On Sunday, my husband left for his annual, he goes twice a year. So I guess that's, I don't know, whatever that is. It's not biannual. He left for his trip to Laughlin on Sunday, just a few days afterwards. Had I known then what I know now, I probably would have said, probably not the best timing. Today's the first day he just left. I'm actually doing much better than I thought I would, but I was really identified yesterday. Y'all know that I've got a trauma history, I've got attachment wounds, I've got abandonment issues, and I just was really identified with that. And it's been really hard. I was having what, if somebody wanted to label it, could probably label depression and anxiety. And as I was talking to my husband, he reflected to me very lovingly that I was really having a lot of fearful thinking about things. Like, I want to go to the beach, but what if it's really crowded and people aren't wearing masks? I want to ride my bike, but what if I fall when you're not here and nobody knows? I want to do this, but what if? And so I can see that fearful thinking is starting to come up again. And if I were going to get really nervous about it, I'd probably go see the doctor and get some medication for anxiety. And I just know that that's what comes up for me. And the same thing with the intense feelings and loss. And I think when we have trauma, I think therapy coaching is excellent. If you need to get some trauma work done, I'm not saying to not do that. I'm 100% advocate of have somebody help you if you're struggling and you're suffering. So I want to be very clear about that. And I've done years and years and years of therapy. I am very active in working on my stuff, and this stuff still comes up for me. And the therapists that I'm close to, we all have junk that comes up, and we still get identified, and we still struggle. And if we've got the tools to manage, we just know that when this comes up, there are things that we need to do, how to lean into it and work through it. But I think if I didn't have the training, and sometimes I will say, like, if I were going to label it, I'd call it depression. So I think that there are ways that we can learn. I love Dr. Brogan's work. Amber in the resources talks about Dr. Mark Hyman. There are a number of people that are in there that do alternative medicine, holistic functional medicine, using supplements, using diet. if you're open, take a look at it. If what you're doing is working for you and you're really committed to it, this is not to threaten anybody at all. It's just to offer another way of looking at things. I'm really working on, there's such a big part of me that doesn't want to offend people, doesn't want to rub people the wrong way, doesn't want to upset people. And I end up not sharing what my truth is. And I really want to change that. I think with this, just with what's going on in the world right now, it's really shown me how my silence can also be seen as being complicit in many, many ways. I just don't want to do that anymore. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Anyways, I really would encourage you to check out the show notes because Amber gave some amazing resources. Thank you for being here. I hope this was really helpful. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're experiencing a little bit of joy and peace. If you're experiencing a lot, that's great. If you're struggling, that's okay too. We're just living through some really challenging times right now. And so I think the more grace and compassion we can have for everything that goes on, the easier it will be. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.